Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's that time of the year, so we'll be talking about Passover Haggadahs, and it's fascinating to see the Passover Haggadah. There are more than 10,000 different editions and publications that came out over the years, and it's just fascinating to see the stories because the Passover Haggadah is supposed to tell the story of the past, but in a way, the Passover Haggadah itself, in every generation, tells a new story. So you have the story of the past and how it sort of synthesizes with the stories that appear. Some stories are very humorous, and some Passover Haggadahs have a sense of irony and humor, and some are, as the history of our people has it, have great tragedies in them. It's interesting because there's the famous joke about someone who asks the Jews, what are you celebrating and how are you celebrating? I think it was Purim originally, and they said they tried to kill us, God saved us, let's eat. And so the Passover story is told also in a celebratory way. So, when you have tragic stories that are told, it's told in this sort of very Jewish group therapy where we're all sitting around speaking about the horrors that we've been through over a dish of food, which is a kind of a very uniquely Jewish experience where you're sort of able to speak with kind of humor, kind of seriousness about things that are very tragic in our past, but also about some very, very happy and glorious moments. So first of all, where does the Passover Haggadah come from? Where does it start? And what is the meaning of Haggadah? So Haggadah literally means to tell. That's what the Magid section of the Haggadah is. And Haggadah means to tell. You tell the story. At the core of the story of the Exodus from Egypt is the commandment, Vehigadat lebincha. Make sure you're going to tell your children the story. And a very Jewish idea of making sure that the story is told. And that's the mitzvah of the night. Nonetheless, we still don't have a tractate in the Talmud or anything that's a full standalone Haggadah. So you have mentions of the Haggadah already in the time of the Mishnah in the 2nd, 3rd century, then much more discussion as the Talmud has it, usually in the Talmud. But actually, the first Passover Haggadah only appears as a unit in the 10th century. So in the 10th century, you have Rabbi Saadia Gaon publishes his Sidur, the way it should appear, and also a Passover Haggadah. Now, it's important to note that Passover Haggadah combines different levels of observance. So, for example, in the Passover Haggadah, it tells you this is the part where you eat the matzah. That is something from the Torah. But you also have, for example, the 4 cups, which are rabbinic. You have singing Haggadah, which is a custom for which I sometimes even go to sleep. I sometimes don't stick around for the Haggadah at the end. So it's this mixture of ritual, discussion, Torah-originated commandments, rabbinic commandments, customs, etc. And so as the centuries go on, more and more Haggadahs develop. But it's just to give you an idea of the numbers. By the 1600s, there are only 25 Haggadahs that have ever been published, and 25 Haggadahs, printed. And by the 1700s, there are 234 Haggadahs that are printed. By the 1800s, you have 1,269 different kinds. And that's the amazing thing about a Haggadah, because a Haggadah is an extraordinary thing that is both very fixed and very flexible. So the Haggadah is sort of written in stone. You have the basics. You got to eat the matzah. You have the maror. You have the manishtana. And then you have the flexible parts, which people add. And that's the amazing thing of the Haggadah, that first of all, it's a book that you're only going to use once a year. So who buys a book that they're going to use only once a year? Not many people. You will. But one amazing thing is that it's a book that it will appear only, that you'll use only once a year. And the other thing is that you are looking at something that has a text that's fixed and set in stone, but then you have the different additions, the pictures, the commentaries, and all these different flexible aspects to it. So by the 1800s, you have 1,269 Haggadahs that are printed of different kinds. I don't want to shock anyone. Between 1900 and 1960, with the Holocaust, with the Soviet oppression, there are 1,100 Haggadahs printed. And now, if I had to guess, there are hundreds of new Haggadahs printed every single year. I printed Haggadah a year ago. It was very easy to do with the self-publishing you can do today. Not very easy.
Just your family?
No, I put it so what I just not to self-promote, but basically when you had the Abraham Accords and agreements between Israel and Arab countries that didn't have relations, I decided it would be a good idea to have a Haggadah with an Arabic translation. So I looked up, I saw the Haggadahs that were published in the 1920s, which I'll speak about, and I put together this Hebrew, English, Arabic Haggadah. I didn't translate, but I brought it all together and had it published. And people used it in Bahrain, in the United Arab Emirates. It actually sold a bunch of copies. But by the way, that's just an example of how the Haggadah is both permanent and also expresses the events of the time. So there were the Abraham Accords, and people are even from the synagogue started living also in Dubai. And so they need a Haggadah. So that Haggadah tells you two stories. It tells you the Haggadah of Passover, but it also tells you what happened in 2022. And so you have this extraordinary number of Haggadahs, more than 1,000 editions over the past 70 years. But if I had to guess, again, just this year, I would say there are just this year, hundreds. There's even a website, I think it's Haggadah.com or something, that helps you craft your own Haggadah. There's an insane number of Haggadahs, really. It's mind-boggling. And so it's an amazing field of study in the sense that it teaches you about Egypt and it teaches you about what's going on, and it covers so many levels of observance, from scriptural eating matzah to on and on with the cups, the maror, and many other things. So another point to ponder about the Haggadah is, where does the Haggadah begin? Where does that Haggadah begin? So some Haggadahs begin with Kiddush, but other Haggadahs start with checking the chametz on the night before Passover. And so the idea is, it shows you that in certain communities, Passover is more of a communal type of event, and in other situations, the Haggadah is catering really for a home observance. So sometimes it's more of a ritual book for a community, and other times the Haggadah is a book for the home. So it's by where it begins, you know who it's catering to. Other Haggadahs, by the way, start with how to set your Seder plate. So you have these different types of different types of Haggadahs and where they begin. Another fascinating field of Haggadahs, which really comes hand in hand with an explosion of Haggadahs, is the world of art and design, because some of the first Haggadahs that we know of that survive to this day are Haggadahs with extraordinary art. And that also teaches us a lot about the Jews who lived at those times. It teaches us a lot about what was going on, the resources. Mostly Haggadahs were for very wealthy people, and we'll talk about that as well. And you also have the commentary, the liturgy, all kinds of additions that came later on that you get to learn about a community, about what's going on. Just to give an example of an addition to the Haggadah, anyone here say Shfoch HaMatcha? Nobody says Shfoch HaMatcha. So the part where you open the door for Elijah?
Oh.
Yeah, okay. So the part where you open the door for Elijah literally says, God, may you punish our oppressors. So may you punish our oppressors, the nations who are persecuting us, and so on. That statement in the Haggadah only starts appearing in the 1100s in Ashkenaz, alongside the increased persecution of the Jews. Some even say that the opening of the door is to make sure that there's no informants there that are going to share the news that we are praying for the destruction of those who are persecuting us and torturing us. So that's another example of how the Haggadah is influenced by events happening around us. And another interesting aspect of the Haggadah also emerges after waves of persecution and anti-Semitism is looking forward, meaning the classic Haggadah only looks back at what happened in Egypt. But suddenly you see in Haggadahs statements like, Adirhu kel b'nei bitcha bekarov, may you build Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, the famous Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim from the end of the Haggadah. These statements come at the end of the Haggadah when Jews say, okay, we know what happened in the past. We're suffering pretty badly now. And where is this all headed? What's gonna be with all of this? So that's another interesting aspect of the Haggadah, is what comes at the end later on. So let's give you now a picture of the first Haggadah, which is amazing because some of these Haggadahs exist till this day. So the first Haggadah we know of, it's called the Bird's Heads Haggadah. I had the honor of seeing it in the Israel Museum. It is from the 1300s from Ashkenaz. Beautiful decoration. The only weird thing about it is that all the paintings have the humans, Bnei Israel, with a big head of a bird. And you wonder why. Now, since scholars debate this back and forth and we have no one answer, maybe someone here wants to tell us, why is it that all the characters of Bnei Israel, your guess is as good as theirs, by the way. Why is it that all the characters in the Haggadah, the Jews suffering in Egypt, the Jews leaving Egypt, all the Jews go through in the Exodus from Egypt, everyone has this huge head of a bird? It's a mystery that many scholars give a note to it. Any thoughts, ideas? Yeah.
Jewish people,
Right.
my father, when he went to travel out west,
Mm-hmm.
they all asked him where the horns were.
Where the horns were. So it's just show that we don't have horns. Yeah.
Birds, the Jewish people who are
The Jews are traveling. Yeah. So just I'll give you a few of the scholarly opinions on why it is that they have this. One opinion is that there's a Torah prohibition on making statues and graven images. And so there is a prohibition on creating real human faces. So the artist wanted to avoid that. It doesn't explain yet why it was birds. Others say it's the Roman Empire's eagle, which was, by the way, very popular later on in Germany. And so the idea is it was a popular symbol of sort of power and royalty. And the other opinion is that it's mocking the it's mocking the Egyptian gods. Why? Because it's saying that the Egyptians believed that the birds were gods. If you look in the hieroglyphics, the Egyptian gods are birds. And so it's to show the gods are not the birds and they're not dominating the children of Israel, but rather the children of Israel are able to overcome that and are able to come out. Another fascinating type of Haggadah. So just by the way, about the bird head Haggadah, which is now in the Israel Museum, it was owned by a very, very wealthy Jewish family all the way through the Holocaust. And interestingly, after the Holocaust, no one knew really where it is. And suddenly it appears in Jerusalem with a fellow who was, I think, a school principal, a teacher, and he had this Haggadah, which was far beyond his means. He sold it for $600 to a art school in Jerusalem called the Bezalel Art School. And later on, the family who used to own it discovered, years after the Holocaust, discovered where it is. They reclaimed it. If I'm not mistaken, it's still in courts to this day. But basically, you have a problem because he sold it to an art school. I don't know if it's any museum, but I saw it in the Israel Museum, sorry. So it's something that's harder. It's not like you have a debate between two private entities. You have a private entity that's trying to get a private. And so similarly, you also have something called the Ryland Haggadah, made in Spain in the 1300s. So you think about that. It's more than 700 years that we have this Haggadah. It was on exhibition in the Met right here in New York City. And so a lot of people went to see it at the time. A fascinating Haggadah is what's called the Golden Haggadah. And as its name indicates, it has actual gold. The pages are decorated with beautiful art and stunning gold on the pages. It's from Catalonia, Spain, from about 1320, 1330. And it is extremely lavish. It's a beautiful. And you have to stop for a second and realize that when I say there were Haggadahs in Spain into the 1300s, most people couldn't afford this type of Haggadah. Most people had, the text of the Haggadah appears probably in your Chumash, partially in the Mishnah, the Talmud. So if you were not the wealthiest guy in town, you had to get by with a Haggadah, either looking it up in your book of the Siddur, the Chumash, whatever it may be. But if you were extremely wealthy, you can commission a Haggadah with an artist, and that was a luxury that people spent a lot of money on. Content warning: the Golden Haggadah from Spain, also a lot of the imagery is very, very graphic and sort of the type of imagery you would expect in the Renaissance in France and Italy. But wealthy Jews were able to commission artists that can really create the type of art that was in the peak of the world at the time, I guess. The other type of Haggadah is very interesting. It's called the Sarajevo Haggadah. It is not from Sarajevo. It's from Barcelona, from, again, the 1300s. And it went through the generations. It's a beautiful Haggadah. Again, it speaks to the kind of art and wealth and calligraphy that people were able to commission. Sometimes it would be a year's salary to be able to have someone make such a Haggadah that's so beautiful. Interestingly, it was placed eventually in Sarajevo, in the museum there. And when the Nazis came to town, one of the curators or whoever it was there gave it to a Muslim scholar who hid it in a mosque. So the Sarajevo Haggadah, which originates in Barcelona, was hidden in a mosque. And later on, they took it out. And just in recent years, they started really taking care of it in a much, much better way and sending it around the world to be shown in different museums. And it's a Haggadah like none other, in the sense that, first of all, the art is extraordinary. And second of all, it survived so many perils. Similar Haggadah, but not exactly the same, is called the Barcelona Haggadah, and less illustrations. But the first printed Haggadah, there's a debate. Was it in Spain, early in Spain, or in Sansino? You ever see the Sansino Chumashim Sidurim? No one saw. I thought that was like old school. The Sansino Talmud. No one saw these English. So Sansino was a town in Italy that had early printing in it, and people would use it for printing. And so in 1486, someone was able to commission a Haggadah and print allegedly the first. Either that was the first or one in Spain, and so that's one of the first printed Haggadahs we have. The next one is called the Washington Haggadah. It's created in 1478 in Ashkenaz. Now, it's interesting. There's a very famous person named Yoel ben Shimon the scribe. Why is he famous? Because a large portion of the Haggadahs that we have today were created by the same person. It's an artist who divided his time between Ashkenaz, Germany, and Italy. And he was able to create these extraordinarily beautiful Haggadahs. It's called the Washington Haggadah. It's not fair, because sometimes these Haggadahs get their name only for the place they eventually end up in. So the Washington Haggadah was created in the 1400s, but since it's today in Washington, D.C., it's called the Washington Haggadah. So this fellow named Yoel ben Shimon created the Washington Haggadah, the Rothschild Haggadah. The Rothschild Haggadah is also extraordinarily beautiful. In the Holocaust, it was taken away and it disappeared. Then after the Holocaust, it was found, it was bought, it was given to Yale University. And then who came? The Rothschild family, and said, this belongs to us. It has the name, the Rothschild Haggadah. And so they got it back, and then they gave it to the Israel Museum, the National Museum in Israel. Then you have a very interesting Haggadah, because the guy who made it has a terrible sense of humor. What do I mean? This is the Prague Haggadah, one of the first Haggadahs to be printed. It's printed in Prague, and it has many, many pictures. And let me ask you a question. In Kadesh, where you start doing the Kiddush, there's a picture that is very un-Jewish. What's the picture? There's this, what do you call it when they go hunting for like rabbits or hares? You know what I'm talking about? There's this European fox hunts, but they go hunting for rabbits. Anyhow, he has this picture of, and it's a very un-Jewish custom for many reasons. We don't do hunting and we don't eat rabbits. So he has this picture at Kadesh of them going, of these people on horses or whatever it is, going hunting for rabbits. What is that doing there? What's the mystery? Why is that? How do you even explain that? So after many investigations, the word for hunting rabbits in German is Jagenhas. That's what it's called. Now, maybe Alan is starting to come on to this. Jagenhas. Now, what happens if on Shabbat, I don't know if that's this year. What day is Passover this year? Is Shabbat the first day? It's Wednesday now. Okay, so sometimes you have a situation where Passover is Saturday night. And so you have to do Havdalah and Kiddush at the same time. You have to end Shabbat and begin Yom Tov. And what do you do if you need to end Shabbat and begin Yom Tov? So you're doing Kiddush is a ceremony that starts something and Havdalah ends it. So how do you combine the two? So there's a process the rabbis call Yaknahaz, which stands for Yain, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. I'm sure everyone has done this at some point, where you make the blessing on the wine, you make Kiddush, you make a blessing on the candle, then you make Havdalah, and then you make a Shechianu, Yaknahaz. So this guy was clever, and he decided to put a picture of Yagenhaz and to remind you of Yaknahaz. So it's completely bizarre that he puts this picture of hunting rabbits, which is Yagenhaz, to remind you of the rabbinic principle of Yaknahaz. I don't know what kind of marriage the guy had, but he writes, you know how you're supposed to hold up the matzah? When you say matzah zu, I'm embarrassed to even say this. When you hold the matzah, you're supposed to, when you say matzah zu, you're supposed to point at the matzah. So you can see this is a real thing. I'm not making it up. So on maror zu, when you point at the bitter herbs, he says some people have the custom of pointing at their wife. And so the same guy that put out the Jagenhaz in Prague, but I guess this flew because he sold it in Prague. It was a popular Haggadah. So this is this guy. I guess he was kind of a prankster or whatever it is. All right. The next Haggadah is in 1509, and it's called the Venice Haggadah. And in addition to being beautiful and well decorated, you also see there a new phenomenon, and that is the commentaries. So we start seeing Haggadah with commentary by Don Isaac Abravanel, who was the finance minister of Spain before the expulsion. And this Haggadah becomes very popular. It's translated to Ladino, Yiddish, and other languages. That's the first time you have something like that. And you also start seeing in 1644 a most fascinating thing, and that is the printing of Haggadahs with musical notes. And I think just to pause for a second and realize what's going on here, the fact that you have so many Haggadahs is a testimony to how meaningful Passover is for so many people. And it's easy to be cynical. For example, someone put out in America something called the Atheist's Haggadah, which is insane because, it's kind of, it doesn't go together. It's a religious celebration. It's a celebration of faith, etc. But I think, so it's easy to be cynical and say that's an oxymoron. But at the same time, it shows you that even the atheist Jew feels like they have to have a part in the Passover story, in the Passover Seder. And so a lot of these Haggadahs really speak to how extremely observed Passover is among the Jewish people, so that even people who, as we will see, there's some crazy Haggadahs out there, even those people feel like they need to be very connected. And so you start having Haggadahs printed with the music, just shows you how observed Passover is, how everyone wanted to have their tunes, their music, people wanted to get their Passover in for everyone. So that's a beautiful version as well. In 1695, you have a Haggadah published in Amsterdam that is specifically catering to survivors of the Spanish Inquisition and their descendants, and specifically created for converso Jews, with memorials for all the Jews who were tortured tortured and murdered by the Inquisition, a precursor in a way to the Haggadahs we'll see that come out around the time of the Holocaust, or if you think about Elie Wiesel's Haggadah. So you have in Amsterdam this Haggadah that's meant specifically for those who are coping and trying to make sense of what we've been through. By the way, being Jewish, if you think about it, we've been through the most insane type of experiences, right? So we have a good sense of humor and we like to enjoy life and be happy, but we've been through some of the greatest traumas in human history. And so to make sense of that, sometimes we just need to sit down, and it's like group therapy, it's like healing. And so the Jews who came to Amsterdam eventually had a Haggadah of their own to sort of figure out what they've been through. Interestingly, in 1837, you have the first American Haggadah printed. It's printed in Philadelphia, and what I found interesting in it, it's called Service for the Two Nights of Passover in English and Hebrew, and it says according to the custom of German and Spanish Jews. Why? Why is that? Because the most popular group in America of Jews are Jews who are either Spanish or German. As we saw, the Spanish Jews came first, then came the German Jews. It made sense. I guess also here the printer was a bit of a character. So a little bit later, he changes it to according to the cut, or maybe I'm misunderstanding, but shortly thereafter, a very similar Haggadah, according to the custom of German and Polish Jews. I guess he saw that you can also sell to, there were enough Polish Jews by then in America that he wanted to sell also to Polish Jews. Now we come to the really interesting ones, because these are the ones that come out in the 1900s. You start having in the kibbutzim, which were often always very socialist, very communist, in some cases very atheist. You start having, it's called Haggadot Kibbutziyot. Only Haggadahs from kibbutzim, you have dozens of versions. There are dozens of versions. Different kibbutzniks put out different Haggadahs, and the kibbutz made the Passover celebration into a whole production. Mainly, one of the reasons, because there was no Israel yet. So there was no day of independence. There was no day of remembering the victims, the IDF fallen soldiers. And so Passover was the time for all the people in the kibbutz to get together and mark whatever it is that they stood for. People would travel from all over to be in the kibbutz that they liked. One of the kibbutzim, called Kibbutz Yagur, had a German Jew who was very gifted musically, and he would put on a magnificent concert. And so you have these kibbutz Haggadahs. As people start putting out their own Haggadahs, they also start adapting the narrative. For example, the four children. Who is the righteous one? Who is the wicked one? And who is the innocent one, or the simpleton? And so some of them start showing the righteous son is the son working in the field plowing. The wicked son is the son who's sitting in shul and learning. And you have some mixtures, but the idea is that they emphasize most is the spring, because Passover is the holiday of the spring, and the renewed redemption of Israel, sort of being in the land of Israel. One that gets a lot of attention, is printed in 1922, is the Communist Haggadah. So by the 1930s, Stalin already decided he's done with the Jews and he was just gonna persecute and kill, etc. But in the 1920s, there was a governmental effort in Soviet Russia to convert Jews to atheism by goodwill, meaning there would be communist schools in Yiddish, there would be Yiddish literature that is communist. By 1930, Stalin was done. He started actually killing and arresting a lot of the members of the Yevsektia, who persecuted, even my own grandfather, they persecuted Jews. They were the ones who closed all the Chadarim, who made sure that Karl Marx was taught in Yiddish. Yevsektia was the Jewish section of the communist government. So they put out a Passover Haggadah, and it's the Moscow Haggadah. It's fascinating. You can see some of the pictures online. Obviously, the righteous kid is the hardworking worker, and they believe in smashing and destroying all the rabbis, the wealthy people. It's about blowing them up. And it's about this new generation of wanting to start a new kind of Judaism that is only for the worker. So that's very, very interesting. And the idea that they focus on is the idea of struggling for freedom, which, by the way, in America to this day, how many people do you think connect with Passover? Remember, who was the first president? I think it may have been President Obama. Who was the first president that hosted a Passover Seder? But it has this meaning we have the Passover that's our story, and it's the story of our people and our exodus from Egypt, but it also has a side that's very appealing to generally the idea of escaping persecution and slavery for freedom, etc., has sort of a wide appeal. And so these Haggadahs of the 1920s, socialist communist Haggadahs, focused on that idea, the idea of liberation. And yeah, look, there's good sides to that and bad sides to that, in the sense that the good side is that people knew that no matter what, a Jew is going to want to observe Passover. So they tried to take people away from it, but that was the idea. And so that's the communist Haggadah. If you look it up, it's very humorous in retrospect, but obviously caused a lot of damage at the time. Very interesting thing, shows you what timing is all about. The Schick Haggadah. Has anyone ever heard of the Schick Haggadah? It's a beautiful Haggadah by a fellow named Arthur Schick. Shows you how timing is everything. He puts out in 1936 a Haggadah that is very politically inclined. And so he shows, when you do the four sons, he shows the Russia, the wicked son, with a mustache, being Hitler. And he shows all the Egyptians enslaving us with red bands on their hands. And in 1936, people tell him, you're ridiculous. People don't want his Haggadah in 1936. Comes 1940, he's in London. Everyone wants his Haggadah. It sells for a fortune of money. Why? Because the war begins, and Hitler is not just a political cartoonish figure, but he is the villain of all villains. And so this Haggadah is very popular. By the way, it's popular to this day. It's sold many thousands of copies, and it happens to have also just non-political or non-historical cartoons, but it's beautiful art. So the Schick Haggadah, it sort of shows you how sometimes timing is everything. In 1936 Poland, people are like, why are you bothering us with your Meshigas about politics in Germany? By 1940, everyone wants that Haggadah. So it sort of shows you what's going on with timing. In 1922, there's the Haggadah in Arabic, the Farhi Haggadah, by a teacher in Cairo. And again, it shows you how, I believe he was commissioned by the king there, King Faisal. And it just shows you how there's a demand to have Passover in whatever language, whatever culture it may have been. Interestingly, as there is a Haggadah kibbutzit of the kibbutzim, there's also different versions. And one of those versions is the people who are deported. Anyone ever hear about the people who tried to come to Israel during the Exodus ship, people who tried to come to Israel, but were put in camps? So those people all needed Haggadahs. And so they did a combination of the kibbutz Haggadah, and it's called Haggadat Ma'apilei Atlit. Atlit was where the British locked people up, and you also have that kind of Haggadah. In believe it or not, I know this is going to sound crazy, but in Morocco in 1945, there's something called Haggadat Hitler. Why? Why? Because the Jews of Morocco put out a Haggadah mocking Hitler and speaking of his evil doings. And so they published this Haggadah, which is in Judeo-Arabic, and it sort of shows the evils that he did, and Avadim Ayinu, etc., with a bend on everything they've been through. Another very, very interesting, completely large field of study is the fact that you have, during the Holocaust, people who write the Haggadah, wherever it is that people are. I've seen some of them are really heartrending, because you see the materials it's written on. Sometimes it's paper from cement bags, and sometimes it's really beautiful. Sometimes you just considering the circumstances, it's astonishing. Sometimes the simplicity and poverty really tell another story, which is also very important. So throughout the Holocaust, you have Jews observing Passover in the most difficult conditions and also writing the Haggadah from whatever it is that they remember. In those Haggadahs, they are very minimalistic. There's the basic version. There's what you need to say. You need to say halach ma'anya, you need to say maybe manishtana, and you need to say avadim ha'inu, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. But after the Holocaust, there's, to me, what's fascinating is it's called the Munich Haggadah. After the Holocaust, a fellow named Yosef Dov Shainson, together with a with a Hungarian Jewish artist named Tzvi Miklos Adler, he illustrates it. He writes a Haggadah that's more of like therapy. He writes a Haggadah about everything we've been through. He writes about what Bechol Dor Vador Omdim Aleinu Lechalutenu, and you see some very graphic images of their children basically going through the chimneys at concentration camps. And so it's this attempt to really cope with what they've been through less than a year ago. It's astonishing in the sense that so short after the Holocaust, people are already sort of coping with what they've been through. And so that's a very interesting Haggadah. At the same time, the American Army publishes a Haggadah, Passover Haggadah, also in Munich for the DP camp. And during the war, you have Jewish soldiers, many Jewish soldiers in the British Army and the American Army. They also illustrate and publish their own Haggadahs. And in those Haggadahs, they're very careful. How do they portray themselves in the Haggadahs? Well, as soldiers. So it's very important to them to show that they are not Jews that are suffering under the yoke of Nazism. Rather, they are Jews that are fighting the Nazis. And so they really publish these Haggadahs where they're shown as these fighters. That's another very fascinating side of things. And that's what they're speaking about. This is kind of crazy, but it's just sort of an interesting phenomenon, again, to show how everyone feels they have a part in the Haggadah. And that is in 1953 in Haifa, you have the Stalin Haggadah. And the Stalin Haggadah speaks about our great hero, they say Joseph Stalin, and then they speak about the need for liberation. If anyone wants, I have the full, I can show people the full copy here. But they speak about the need for liberation, about the universality of the struggle, and what a absolute utopia everything's going to be once we put in the communist agenda. And of course, they didn't know about the atrocities Stalin inflicted on humanity at the time. But again, it just gives you an idea of the need for every single person to find their place in the Haggadah. I believe that to this day, studies show there are more Jews who observe Passover than there are who observe Yom Kippur. And that's a testimony to many things. Number one, it's a testimony to a Judaism that is at home. Of course, the synagogue, the day school, the JCC, these are all vital aspects of Jewish life. But the Judaism that you get at home with family is also something that cannot be substituted. And so the fact that people feel more comfortable coming to a Passover Seder than they do going to synagogue on Yom Kippur, I think speaks to something. Yeah?
I don't want to make this as a hard and fast generalization.
Yeah.
But Pesach is a lot more fun.
Pesach is, it's easier to eat the matzah than, there's the joke about the, very good. So, there's the joke about the two beggars. One of them is a Jew, one of them is a Gentile, and they always go together. So a few weeks before Passover, the Jewish beggar tells his partner, he says, listen, there's this holiday coming up. I know we starve sometimes a week at a time. We don't touch a piece of food for a week, but it's coming. Help is on its way. The infantry is coming. So he says, don't worry, just do what I tell you to do. Before Passover, he asks him to get maybe a piece of clothing that looks a bit more respectable. He takes him to shul. They stand together. They pray together. And at the end of Shul in many European countries, by the way, it's a shame they don't have it as much. I saw it only once in America, in Boston, where they invite people after Shul. They say, if anyone needs a place to eat, you should come eat at my house. They do that. I saw that once in the Young Israel, a few times, in the Young Israel in Brookline. But in Europe, it used to be common that at the end of davening, every person who did have a house and food would invite some of the beggars who didn't have a house. So he says, come stand with me. I'll take you, just do everything that I do. All right, they get invited to the house of someone and they walk in and they cannot believe their eyes. I mean, they get to sit at a table with plates and cutlery and cups, things they haven't seen in years. So they sit together and the non-Jew is, he hasn't eaten in days, his stomach is turning over. And all right, they get first a cup of wine, kiddush. All right, good. Suddenly, the person at the head of the table starts talking and talking and talking, and he's starved. And he says, "What's going on?" He says, "Don't worry, it's coming." They take out a little piece of celery. They give him a piece of celery. He's about to eat it. They say, "Don't, first put it in the salt water." All right, he's starting to lose his mind. They pour a second cup. He wants to at least drink another cup. Talking and talking and talking. He tells his friend, "Listen, you lied to me. You misled me. No, I'm telling you it's going to be good." All right, he waits. 2 hours go by, 3 hours go by. Finally, he says, "Okay, it's here." They bring out this cracker that's a bit rusty and whatever. He bites it and he's enraged. All right, he says, "You know what? I'm going to give you one more chance." Finally, they come out with this big plate. He sees this white vegetable. Of course, he didn't know it's horseradish. And, and finally, a second before Shulchan Orech, he eats the horseradish, he slams his hand on the table, and he says, "You know what, I'm done with this whole thing," and you leave. And this joke is used in Yiddish folklore to sort of show how sometimes people wait and wait and wait, and they don't realize that help is, you waited so long and you're just about to get there, so don't worry. But yeah, it's easier to sit and observe a holiday sitting around with family and eating than it is to go to shul and fast and say, "God, please forgive me." Yeah.
I knew somebody a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He ate so much of
The karpas, yeah.
that, you know what he
Karpas at the
developed?
beginning he ate?
No, during the
Yeah. You mean the horseradish? The
I say karpas as
You mean the celery?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's at
But
the
it
beginning.
wasn't- Yeah, but.
All right, he
the
noshed on the celery throughout, yeah.
He ate so much of that, he developed carpus tunnel syndrome.
All right, for those who didn't hear, it was a pun joke about carpus tunnel syndrome. All right, that's sort of the idea. So to this day, you have every year, you have Haggadahs that are more humorous, more focusing on the art, focusing on the commentary, focusing on the customs, focusing on the history, and every year these come out. And just sort of to wrap everything up, it's a testimony to how the Haggadah tells us three things. It tells us the story of Egypt. It tells us the story of what is going on in that generation, what people are focusing on, what they're talking about. But it also shows you what people are yearning for. Like you see in the 1300s, the emergence of more and more Lashana Ba B'Yerushalayim, Yivne Beito Bekarov, etc., where you're focusing on the future. So Be'ezrat Hashem, with everything going on in the Jewish people and all the kibitzing that people are doing and all the debating and arguing that we're doing, everyone should sit around one table on Passover, celebrate, enjoy. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention the most important one, the Maxwell House Haggadah. So that actually is a fascinating story. Why? Maxwell House Coffee realized that they're in real danger. Why? Because what do you make coffee out of? Beans. But they're not beans. But so the Maxwell House Coffee were afraid that people will forbid coffee because of kitniot, the prohibition on legumes and beans, when in fact, coffee is not even a real bean. It's a fruit. Don't tell coffee I said that, but coffee is not a bean. It's a fruit, so it wouldn't be forbidden anyways. But to make sure that no rabbi even dreams of saying that coffee is not kosher for Passover, they did a brilliant marketing strategy and advertising, and they printed the Maxwell House Haggadah, which still you can get in, I think, in ShopRite and other places you go, and you can get it to this day. So that's the story of a very American Haggadah that they give. You can take as many as you want. Yes, yeah, no, the Maxwell House Haggadah is one of the most brilliant. Look, I never drink coffee. I definitely never drank Maxwell, but I know what Maxwell House is because of the Haggadah. So it was a good marketing. It was a good marketing strategy. So if you're gonna get a free Haggadah in ShopRite, why not? And if it helps Maxwell assure us that it's not kitniot, even better. Yeah.
Go crazy looking for kosher for Passover coffee. Then Maxwell House makes it, kosher. for
Yeah,
Passover.
that was the whole idea.
It's
Kosher for
so
Passover.
Do you have to buy kosher for Passover coffee?
Yikes. I don't think I'm prepared to answer the question. I don't know offhand which coffees are not or yes or not kosher for Passover, but if you look up the OU have
Yeah.
their Passover guide, and I'm pretty sure they'll have their whole section for coffees. But I can't imagine it's only one coffee that people drink on Passover. Oh, you have to be careful because sometimes things are manufactured together with others, and so especially Passover, people are more careful. So I'm sure the OU have the. I even saw this is also kind of funny, but with AI, they have this artificial intelligence, and it writes essays for you, etc. So someone put out a website called Rebbe.io, and it's an artificial intelligence rabbi. I don't know if you can go by everything, but it's a real rabbi because when you go to the landing page, the first thing you see is donate. So they're asking you right away, but yeah, it's I'm sure the OU have it on in serious.
It cannot be a legitimate rabbi unless he says Kiddush to follow.
Kiddush to follow, yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Wishing everyone a happy Passover. Thank you. And Bezrat Hashem, next week, 5:30, so we don't conflict with Mincha. I know it's not easy for everyone, but we'll do our best next week, 5:30.
Are you gonna be in here, in this room?